So we're going to go ahead and do our first, um, our pre-presentation question. We're going to ask you this right now, and then once again after the workshop, just to evaluate the effectiveness of this workshop, and see if we need to change anything for next year. Um, so for this question, I am familiar with the common components of grants. If you definitely agree with that, if you are definitely familiar with the common components of grants, that is letter A. If you mostly are familiar, that's letter B. If you're not sure, that is letter C. If you are mostly not familiar with the common components of grants, that is D. And if you definitely are not familiar with them, then that is letter E. All right, and we got about 20 responses here, so let's go ahead and see. Wow, we have an audience of experts. That's good to see. Well, hopefully we'll still be able to share some new information for all of you who have it all down pat, but sweet. So we're also going to do another quick question here. This is to test you for all of those folks who are definitely knowledgeable of the common components of grants. Why don't you prove it and let us know what are some common mistakes made in grant applications? So the first option, an incomplete application, that's letter A. If the group or organization does not meet the eligibility requirements, then that is letter B. If the problems statement was researched and data was collected, that is letter C. Or if you think it was both A and B, an incomplete application and group not meeting the eligibility requirements, that is letter C. Looks like we're still getting a few rolling in here. Again, if you didn't catch it before, the instructions on how to respond to these is at the top of this slide. So let's go ahead and see our responses. All right. 84% of you are definitely experts on this topic, so you were not lying. I am going to throw it over to Eric at this point, so we can get started on the workshop.
All right, thanks, Michael. I'm glad to see that we've got a lot of people who are familiar with grants today. That makes my job a little bit easier, I think, but I'll still give it my best and try to hopefully impart some new wisdom or different ways to think about how to apply for grant funding. So first, I should introduce myself. My name is Eric Anderchuk, and I am the Director of Grants and Development at the Flint and Genesee Chamber of Commerce. I've been there for a little over 5 years now and started off there working specifically in economic development, grant writing, and now I supervise a team of people who work for that space and then also our after school education and training space as well. So have a variety of experiences in that way, kind of dealing with after school programming, school education type grants, and then also community development and academic development as well. So that's where my expertise lies. And so I want to give everyone an opportunity today to kind of go over a very surface level basics of grant writing, talking about some of the common components of what grants are, some other things to keep in mind when you're applying, and then also what are some common mistakes that people should keep an eye out for. Just before I get started though, we are, our organization, the Chamber, we do business trainings as well, and we will be doing a series of much deeper dives into grant writing, and we call them grant writing 101 and 201. And so we get into some of those topics and some of these topics, and then also some others in a lot more depth. Covers a time period of about 3 hours, so that's like a half a day. So my team joins me in giving that presentation as well. So you get a variety of different people speaking. So a little bit more interactive and engaging as well. So if you're interested in that, those are coming down the road in April and May of this year, and they will be virtual unless we are able to do something in person. Just keep an eye out to the Flint and Genesee Chambers website or Facebook page, and you'll see when those are coming up. I don't have dates quite yet. So let's get started with eligibility and funder identification. Excuse me. When you're applying for grants, I think the number one thing to do when you're researching is to understand if you're eligible to receive grant dollars, and then also what funders or what places should you be looking for grant opportunities. So I think the first thing is to just establish your eligibility. And so most entities that apply for grants are considered nonprofits. So you have to have a 501c3 tax exempt status from the IRS. And that's pretty much the basic core there is getting that process taken care of. And so if you have that, great, then there's some other things to keep in mind. But if you don't, can you not receive grants? No, there's some other ways that you could look about it. A partnership is definitely one of them. But if you are a 501c3 and you have that status, you should make sure that your structure of your organization is set up so that you can accept grant dollars and donations. So what does that mean to have your organization set up to be eligible for grant funding? You need to have things like board of directors or boards of trustees. These are people in your community that represent the community you serve and also bring some expertise to the organization that you are trying to get grant funding for or to do some great nonprofit work. So boards are something that you have. They provide some oversight over the organization. And like I said, they're great people to have on your team with you that have expertise in, maybe you have a lawyer on your board. So that's really great to have some legal background or some financial background. Having a CPA is another great example of someone to look for if you don't have a board yet, or you're trying to fill a position, or you're trying to establish your first one. Other things that you should keep in mind are staffing and how, what kind of experience they bring to the table. Bookkeeping and financials are definitely a huge part of this. So having a really great financial person or someone on your team that is an accountant that has really great bookkeeping skills or background, and also having those tools in place if you need some software or if you need to understand what kind of structure your financial books need to have in order to be accepting grants. So those are some things to think about in terms of eligibility. The other thing I said was partnership. So do you have to be a 501c3 to accept a grant? Technically, yes, to actually get the grant dollars, but you can always partner with someone to get that kind of credibility set up before you have that 501c3 status. So you don't have to wait to start the work, but you can really definitely work with an organization who's a little bit further along and can get you to that process. And they can also help mentor you in how to set up your boards and how to establish bookkeeping and all that great stuff. So if it's not something you're ready to do yet, you don't have that 501c3 status, look for a similar organization to something that has the same mission and values as you do, and looking in the community and try to find that person or that organization to partner with to help out. The other thing that you should start before you even apply for a grant is looking for a funder to help get you those grant dollars. So my kind of thought on that is you should always start really small and work your way up to the big funders. So you should be looking around your community for places that have very small grant funding to start with. You know, look at your corporate giving opportunities in the community. These are really great ways to practice grant writing too, because it helps you understand what you need to get collected paperwork wise and how you should answer questions. These are just really great practice grants to get your teeth into. So look to some corporate opportunities in your community. Banks, big box stores like Target or Meijer, national chains, they have corporate giving opportunities that are very similar to the grant writing process that can get you started off. Once you kind of get those practiced up and you start getting your first grants, which they'll probably be kind of small, which is nothing to, shake a stick at. Small grants are just as impactful as large ones because you'll need those dollars still anyways. But once you get past that kind of the Meyer and the targets, then you can start working your way to small family foundations. And those are in the community. You can seek them out on the internet. It's a great source to look for different funders. I think U of M Flint has the founders directory that you can also look to for other smaller family foundations to get started and working your way up. So family foundations, and then local governments, your city governments, county, then you can kind of work your way up to the large family foundations. And then like obviously state and federal grants are like the top tier. Those are going to be the ones that are the most rigorous applications. They're going to require the most out of your organization in terms of eligibility. They're going to have a very robust and rigorous reporting process. So work your way up from those smaller ones that don't have all that stuff, practice there, and then kind of gain your speed and your momentum so that you're ready to go when it's time to get the big dollars from those big family foundations or the state and federal government. The other thing you need to think about when you're looking for grants are thinking about your geographic location. So you want to make sure you're looking for funders in your immediate area first, because funders really want to support projects that are happening locally. It doesn't make sense for you to apply for funding if you're here in Flint and doing work in Flint, but the funder is in California or something like that. There might not be a very close connection for them to want to fund your project here in Flint if it's not going to impact them or help them in California. Again, always start small. So think about the city of Flint first, work your way to Genesee County, and then you work yourself up regionally into the state level. So kind of similar, you start small and then work your way out. And then lastly, focus areas. A lot of funders have primary focus areas that they are really passionate about. And so if you're someone that does education grants for a school or for a daycare or for your church youth programs, you want to keep an eye out for funders that also really value and want to impact youth in the same kind of way. So make sure that you're looking for the same focus areas that match the work that you're doing and the mission of your organization. I just saw a question. Maybe I missed a couple all the way.
Eric,
But
this is Teresa. You do have one question from Chad. Are there lists of these foundations somewhere?
So there are some lists, but they're not publicly available. So like I said, right now, there's a directory at the U of M Flint library, and it's only available there at the moment. But you can go there and when it's open to the public and get access to their foundation directory, and that helps you identify all types of funders across various different levels. All right, so let's talk about the actual common components of grants. And so these are the things that you are going to have to make sure that you answer when you write out your proposal to the funder or to the corporate giving entity like Target or Meyer. These are the things that they're going to want to know. So I'm going to go through each one of these one by one and talk a little bit about what that section should include, what needs to be in there, and why it's important. So the first section of the proposal is the executive summary. And this is really an introduction paragraph. So someone like me who's a writer, I'm going to save actually that for the very last thing to do, because I want to be able to briefly and concisely describe the whole project in a couple of paragraphs to the funder. This serves as a very good overview of what everything will be impacted and accomplished through this grant. And it saves the reader from having to read the whole thing to understand exactly what's happening here. So I always save that for last, because once you're done writing everything else, that just makes that last thing very easy to do, actually. Now that you have a full understanding of the project, you should be able to describe it pretty concisely that way. Excuse me. The second thing that I have on the list is the introduction of your organization. So in this section, you really want to describe your organization's history and describe your group in great detail. What is it that got this group started? Who are the original funders of this group? Where's the history? So why did this get started? Why did your organization, your nonprofit, get working in this space? Why is your focus area, for instance, education? Why do you want to help impact youth? And what have you done in the community? So this is a great place to also describe your experience so far. So if you have been doing this stuff for a while, you can talk about your previous projects or your previous grant opportunities that you've received and how those have gone. It's a really great way to show a funder that you guys have the experience of this, and that you also you've got some credibility, you've got some weight in the community. The next section is the problem statement, or this is also sometimes called a needs assessment. So basically in this section, you're going to be describing what is the problem that you're trying to solve, or what is the problem that you're trying to address. Because that you're a boots on the ground, organization, you can better describe what it is that's happening that you can see in the community that you want to solve. And so you need to also be able to show data that says that this is a problem that is in our community and that we have a solution that might address this problem. So you might also want to talk about some of the benchmarking you've done to show that the thing that we're about to propose has shown to be effective in other parts of the nation or around the world, and hopefully it has a similar impact here in our community as well. And hopefully you can be able to describe that by comparing it to a community that's similar to ours. So trying to think of a different community that has similar demographics or similar challenges that need to be addressed. That helps kind of tie the two together. The next section is project objectives. And in this section, you really want to describe what are those great impacts that you're trying to make and what you want to accomplish with the grant funding. So for instance, it's not going to be something as granular as getting foot traffic into downtown. It's going to be something bigger, much larger that you're trying to describe. And so while foot traffic might be a goal and to get people downtown and spending dollars, but you want to show that it's really about improving the economy of downtown by getting retail shops, and why there needs to be some infrastructure needs in your area. Those are things that you should talk about in the goals and what you want to accomplish with grant funding. You're not going to be talking about the activities that get you there. You're talking about where it is you want to be. What is your vision for this project ultimately? Because in the next section, the project methods and design, this is where you're going to describe the work. So in able to do our project, these are the things that we need to be able to do to make the big impact we want to make in the community. So for instance, if you are trying to address blight in your community, what are the things that you need to do to address blight? Do you need to purchase a bunch of shovels and rakes, and you need to host community events in order to bring volunteers in concentrated volumes to help solve this issue? What are the actual things that you're going to do in order to meet your big goal that you're trying to accomplish? The next section is project evaluation. And so this is how you know your project worked and can it be improved. So basically with this, you just want to be able to show the funder that you were able to do a project, and how can you show that it actually made impact in the community. So For instance, if we were trying to do a park cleanup and we wanted to know if the project worked, if we were trying to evaluate it, we might try to say that we looked for how many people were coming to the park, and before we did the park cleanup, there was 20 people coming on a weekly basis, but after we did the park cleanup, 50 people on average came a week. And you'd be able to say that this worked because foot traffic increased at this park overall, or crime stats were really low afterwards because we did a park cleanup in this area. Something that shows that the work you've done has made some kind of impact. And sometimes it's easier to say stuff, in a short time frame, but you really need those long-term impact goals. So sometimes think about, how are we going to be able to showcase that we have made some impact using these community dollars? Another item that a funder would want to know about in your project or proposal would be, how can you keep it going, or who else is funding it? So a lot of times funders really want to know, are other people helping contribute to this project, because they want to see that other people are interested, and they don't want to be the only funder helping, especially if they know that the project isn't going to be able to go after the grant funding is gone. So being able to say that you are able to continue the project after the grant is over is a really great method to get the grant dollars, but also to think about how should you keep a project going after the grant dollars are done. Having that plan in mind is really great. And then lastly is the project budget. And so this is where you're going to show all of the revenue streams that are coming in, all the dollars that you're getting in terms of grants or donations, and then how are you going to use the money? So is it to buy materials? For instance, the park cleanup, do you have to buy rakes and shovels? Do you have to buy playground equipment and materials? All those things that you'll be buying as part of the grant dollars, you'll have to show that and have researched it ahead of time to know that you've got the dollars and that the expenses will match, but also that you've got the funding taken care of, and you've got that all planned out ahead of time. So the more research you can do, the more cost estimates that you can get that are more accurate, the better your budget will be. I saw a couple of questions come through.
Eric, I can read some of those off for you.
Sure.
This is Teresa again. I just turned off my camera so I can eat some dinner while you're talking. So we had a couple of people just drop into the chat that there's, you can access the foundation directory at the Flint Public Library, and then I think also with the McFarland Library in Grand Blanc, and at the Genesee District Library headquarters.
Mm-hmm.
And then I just put a link to the directories that University of Michigan lists that they have access to, so that people can kind of see what that looks like.
Great.
And Connie and Edna both were commenting and saying, it's important to let the funders know what you learned, what your mistakes were, what worked and what didn't work, and then plan to address any challenges and meet your goal the next time.
Yeah, and I think also on that same vein, it's important to keep your program officer, which is the person at that funder or foundation that you're working with, keep them up to date on things throughout the whole process. So if something does start changing and you know that, it's good to maybe talk to that program officer to get some ideas on their end on what a possible solution could be, or just keeping them aware just keeps them feeling like they're along for the ride, and they understand when the hiccups pop up or when things don't go exactly as planned. So my recommendation is just to make sure that your funder always knows what's happening, as much as you can. So lastly, I just wanted to talk about, why do proposals fail and what are some common mishaps? Sometimes it's easier to understand what to avoid when writing a grant. So the first and probably the biggest thing is an incomplete application. So that means not answering all the questions or leaving a blank if you don't have an answer for that question. or not fully answering the question that's proposed. I see a lot of times what people do is they'll read a question and they'll start to answer it, but it really doesn't answer the question at heart. They go on a long tangent about something else, and then they don't really address the question at hand. So make sure that you are answering the question that's being posed to you at that time. I think a lot of times people just want to insert as much info as they can, and so they don't always fully answer the question, but they'll make sure that that space is fully loaded with other somewhat pertinent information. And then obviously grammar and spelling issues. So it's always really great idea to make sure that someone else reads your proposal or your application after you have finished the first draft, because when people see grammar or spelling mistakes, or if there's a mistake in the budget, it really kind of hurts your credibility. And so that person who is reviewing might think, oh no, can this person handle a grant of this size or this magnitude? So these things they seem so common, but make sure you just keep an eye on it and create some kind of backup. So if someone else goes through it, a couple different sets of fresh eyes, that will really help catch all of those problems right there. The other thing is wrong eligibility and wrong funder. And so I talked about this at the beginning. So make sure that you are an eligible entity that can apply to a funder, and make sure that's a good match. So making sure you've got your organization set up so that you can receive grant dollars, but then making sure that you're also researching a funder that connects with you on those same kind of focus areas of education or health related grants, making sure that those are a good match, because you don't want to put all the time and effort into writing a proposal to a funder that's not going to even read your grant because it has nothing to do with what they fund, or it's in the totally wrong geographic area, something like that. And I just got done talking about making sure that you create a great funder relationship. So, if problems or hiccups do pop up, you have that relationship established with your program officer and the funder already, so that they can help you resolve those issues and work through them, instead of being surprised at the very end of the process by something that totally didn't work. And now the project is completely different, or something has changed that they wouldn't like. So making sure that you establish that funder relationship is key. And then it also is good for the next round of funding. So if you did a really great job of keeping in contact with your program officer and telling them what they needed to know, when the next funding opportunity comes along, they're going to be more wanting to work with you, because they can trust you and know that you're going to be giving them everything they need along for the process. The other thing is do research and collect data. So in order to be able to write a grant, you have to put some commitment to getting research done and gathering data. And that can be for the needs statement, so explaining why there's a problem in your area that you want to solve. Collecting research and data on the evaluation, so making sure that you have a way or a method to show that you did good work in the community and that people appreciated it. So thinking about ways to collect that data is also important. For instance, surveys are a great way to get evaluations done. And that's part of what's happening here. Is we did some questions at the beginning of the process, and you'll be answering some questions at the end, and hopefully that will show if there were some areas that I needed to go over that maybe could have been went into deeper as well. So, and then lastly, budget is also critical. You want to be able to share with your funder exactly the cost that you are going to need to spend in order to do the project. And if there's some mishaps there, that could really be a problem for you. If you overspend, then you're going to have to pay for some items on your own. Or if you underspend, you might have to turn some grant dollars back in that you weren't intending to do. So making sure that your data and research is up to par is key. And then there's just sometimes it's out of your hands. I mean, with the amount of resources and the number of applicants just don't match. So trying to fit all of these puzzle pieces together can take some time and some energy, and you might put together a really great proposal, but the funder really had to make some key decisions. And so it may just be that you were the next person down on the list that they were not able to fund for some reason. They ran out of funding dollars, or they had a couple of projects that needed some more money that they really wanted to put something behind. So don't feel terrible when you get denied a grant. That happens to me all the time, unfortunately. I've been doing this for several years now, and you have to get used to being denied a few times, and that will help you learn how to put together a better proposal that will eventually get funded. All right, next slide. So this last slide, that's the end of the basic components of grant writing, but I wanted to just share with everyone a little bit about my experience in getting involved with grant writing. So, and really there are no really great, degrees out there for a grant writer. Most people don't go to college to become a grant writer. You kind of get put into the situation, and then you're kind of just set free to try to tackle it. There's a lot of great workshops out there that give you the basics. I've taken a few of them, and I've given a couple of them myself. So trying to help get that out to the community so that people can understand what grant writing's like, and hopefully get inspired to try it themselves. But it really takes a lot of firsthand experience to get to that space. And so for me personally, my background is actually in journalism. I went to college to study journalism in terms of newspaper writing. And when I graduated, I was very fortunate to find a job at a very small local newspaper. But at that time, newspapers were kind of a dying industry. And so I started looking elsewhere because I didn't see a whole lot of room for growth. And then I started working at my local library. And when I started working there, I started understanding how nonprofits work or governmental entities. And so I started to understand that grant writing was a part of that. And grant writing is a great way to get dollars for projects that you really want to do, but you just don't have, the funding for. And so my boss at the time said, "Here, why don't you start writing a couple of these? You've done journalism, writing for newspapers, so writing shouldn't be that difficult for you." And so I started with a very small one for $500. It was to the local United Way in that county, and it was awarded. And so my boss said, "Well, why don't you try a little bit bigger one now?" And so I wrote one for $1,500, and same thing. I was funded. And then I started writing a couple more. And then unfortunately, I started getting those denial letters, which, especially after like a 2-win streak, I was so high with momentum in terms of I was going to, I was like on the road to being able to grant write for everything. And so those denial letters, gave me that like humbling experience, like, you know what, it doesn't always work out. But that's where I really got started. Was I started working at the library, and it was a very small one. So they didn't have a great, huge operational budget. And we wanted to do a program for senior citizens. And there was a community lunch program for senior citizens available, but that was only 1 hour every day. And afterwards, the space was needed for something else. And so the seniors wanted a place to socialize and hang out and spend time with each other. So we started writing grants for this program, and we started getting funded, and we were able to bring in really cool speakers from across the state, authors and different political figures and entertainment. We brought in performers, and it just really grew from there and there. And the not only did the content of that program grow, but the size of our group grew. And so before you knew it, people from other little towns nearby were coming to be part of our senior programs, and they were spending 3 to 4 hours at the library every Thursday, just hanging out and having great educational experiences and also got to socialize and have a little fun. They'd play some cards, and we got funding for meals. So we started having a lunch and dessert. So it just grew and grew, and it really just became something after a while of really putting a lot of energy and effort toward it. And so after I left the library, then I started my job at the Chamber of Commerce, and that's when I started writing, much more detailed, much more comprehensive grants. And so really that's why I suggest the process of practicing with really tiny, small ones and really working your way up to something to really get that experience. And then you'll just be able to add on to your set of skills that way. And so that's my background. Does anyone have any questions for me before I hand it off to Israel?
I don't see any questions in the chat or hands up. But this is Teresa. I do just want to make a note that I believe we're going to have a little bit of a break between the sessions. So, but I don't see any questions here. Yeah, don't see any questions here.
Well, I'm sure my contact info will be attached to any materials that go out. So if anyone has any questions, you can always email. It is eanderchuck@flintgenesee.org, which is very difficult to spell. So I'll make sure it gets into the chat before I leave. But anything else? Any other questions?
No, but I did see one comment in the chat, Eric. Dr. Lewis says, great job, very thoroughly done.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
And there was also a comment about when is the Chamber's grant workshops. And so I did note that the date is still to be determined. And once Eric sends us that information, we'll make sure that this group receives that information as well. But yes, you can also check their website frequently to see if the calendar of trainings have been updated. And so at this time, Israel is just going to do a brief sharing of how he got started. His workshop is next. He'll be talking about crowdfunding. And then once he's done, again, if you have any questions for him, we just wanted to have them share their experience, because a lot of people get into grant writing because they were just passionate about a cause or concern. They just begin to put pencil to paper and writing about something that they wanted to get funded. And they might tap into someone else that may be good at writing, but eventually you can develop a team that's able to do that for you, or you can tap into one of your technical assistance partners we talked about early on last week, that will be able to partner with you and be a fiscal sponsor and be able to help submit grants if that is a need. But at this time, Israel, so if you want to just
really quickly before we move on, I did see someone mentioned to me that they had a question. Chris Johns, did you have a question for Eric?
Yes, I did. Eric, my one question is, as a funder, is there a limit to the number of, like, I guess, ancillary details? Like, if let's say you had media coverage of your effort. I mean, I know the application is critical, but is it also helpful to share like newspaper articles and just kind of general media coverage of your event, of your project as well?
Yeah, so that's kind of what happens after the grant has been awarded. Unless you have some previous press coverage that you can showcase in your grant proposal, which I think is always a good idea because it shows your experience and where what work you do in the community. But once you get the grant and you get a grant agreement and you have to go through that process, usually a funder does want to be aware of any press that's being done with their grant dollars. So if you are going to be promoting the funder as, like the main sponsor of your event, then they would probably want to know ahead of time. But that would definitely be something you'd want to showcase also in your report on the back end of the grant. Because a lot of times, well, all times, funders want you to report what happened. And so that would be a great way to share that link or share that video with your funder as well.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Corporate grantors, they seem to pose that question more often than others, in my experience. They definitely like to know how they're going to get media exposure. So if you can show you've already been successful in doing so, that's going to look good.
Okay. Thanks, everybody.